Hi, my name is Uma, and I'm going to be presenting a little bit about the southern gray-cheeked salamander, which is worked on by the Riddell lab, which I looked at for my final project. So we'll jump right in. You'll notice that I had a mountain picture on the cover slide. So this is just a little bit of information about the southern gray-cheeked salamander. So the southern gray-cheeked salamander is a salamander native to the North and South Carolina temperate forests, which for us here in North Carolina is those mountains like you just saw back on the previous slide. So they really like temperate forests. So, where it doesn't get too cold or too warm. It's a not too much temperature fluctuation and humidity fluctuation throughout the year, and the North Carolina mountains really offer that. However, the salamanders are facing a lot of habitat loss and change just due to human activities in the mountainous areas, which is forcing them to move and acclimate or kind of adjust to different habitats. They typically live underground, so they spend most of their lives below the surface of the earth, and they don't have lungs. They breathe by just letting oxygen kind of flow through their skin, which is really interesting. Kind of like us humans, we inhale and exhale, but salamanders, they don't really have to do any of that. The oxygen just kind of comes in now. So, a little bit about the Riddell Lab. The Riddell Lab looks specifically at how these salamanders are able to adapt and adjust to new environments that they're being pushed into. And in particular, I'm going to jump into a little bit about how they look at how much oxygen is really flowing through the skin of these salamanders so that they can learn, how salamanders are able to adjust to environments where there's maybe more oxygen or less oxygen. And these are just a few pictures from the Riddell lab. So you can see the salamander down there in the bottom right corner. And then up at the top is actually an image we're going to look more into on the next slide. So I wanted to kind of jump into how the Riddell lab specifically looks at how the oxygen does flow through the skin of these salamanders. So they use an assay. An assay is just a test. They use this test in the lab called a flow through assay. Um, and that is how they're able to measure how much oxygen the salamanders are taking in through their skin. So they do this flow through assay by putting them in a tube. So that's what you can see in this picture here. That's Dr. Riddell. He's the primary investigator of the lab. And you kind of just literally put them in this glass tube, the little salamanders in there, and then there's a machine that you kind of hook up to the tube, and you can measure how much oxygen is kind of leaving the tube, how much carbon dioxide is entering the tube, and you know that the salamander is obviously the only living thing in that tube. That's how much oxygen is being taken in through their skin, and how much is being exchanged in the form of carbon dioxide. Um, and this really gives good information on how the salamanders are going to adjust to those changing environments. Like I said, if they're, say, higher up on the mountain, they're being pushed higher and higher up on the mountains, they're going to have, less oxygen available because there just is lower oxygen availability at higher altitude. So how are those salamanders really able to adjust when they're pushed to those new environments? If they're coming to lower altitudes, how do they adjust to more oxygen being available? Does that make for bigger salamanders? Things like that. So the Riddell lab really looks at the relationship between organisms, their bodily functions, and how that interacts with the environment in a changing world. So they do a lot of really relevant research that is especially important in this day and age where our climate and earth are changing so much due to human activity and natural activity. And this is just one really cool thing that the Riddell lab looks at. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation.